637, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Always great to have James Carafano, foreign policy military analyst with the Heritage Foundation, joining us. James, always great to speak to you. Of course, over the weekend, iconic photo of President Trump and Vladimir Zelensky, and they are at the Pope's funeral. But, I mean, it's two chairs, two men, two leaders in the middle of this large room, and President Trump seems to be, at least to me, playing both sides right now, in the sense that last week he blasted Zelensky, saying that he was the one standing in the way of a peace deal. Now, after that conversation with Zelensky, Trump now says it is Vladimir Putin. What do you think of this weekend's latest developments?
Yeah, it says a lot about our president. For people who get wrapped up in these kind of caricatures of who he is and how he responds, fundamentally what drives Trump's vision and execution on foreign policy is America's interest. And he always puts that ahead of his own personal interests and prejudice. I don't think there's any secret that Zelensky's attitude in the White House in that meeting that they had was completely unacceptable, and it really angered the president, who really felt the United States was putting out a lot for the people of Ukraine, and he personally had invested a lot in trying to get a peace deal to prevent Zelensky's people from dying in the streets of Kyiv and other places. What we saw over the weekend in that meeting with Zelensky was a president of the United States who was willing to put the interests of his people first and put the personal animosities and issues aside, and even the slings and arrows thrown at him. And I think we also saw that from Zelensky, a leader who said, you know, how people treat me, how I'm perceived in the public, that's not as important as delivering for the people of the United States. I mean, you saw those two leaders sitting there knee to knee in the Vatican. I think you really saw a picture of what leadership is all about. And I'll tell you, the one person not in that picture is Vladimir Putin. And the one thing I can absolutely tell you, regardless of what you think about Ukraine and Russia and the U.S. and the war, whatever else, is Vladimir Putin is not a leader who in his heart cares about the people of Russia. Their aspirations, their suffering, their sacrifices. He cares about holding on to power and keeping power and his own image of the Russia that he has in his head. I mean, there's no difference from somebody like Vladimir Putin and Tony Soprano, and how he, doesn't care about the mafia. He doesn't care about New Jersey. He cares about him, right? And so I think that photo will be one of the iconic photos of this century.
Some folks have said that Vladimir Putin, James Carafano, by the way, with the Heritage Foundation joining us, some folks, James, have said that Putin actually does not want this war to end. He likes seeing the United States and Europe in disarray and fighting amongst ourselves and all this, not to mention America spending all of that money on the war, and of course the military equipment that we're sending off to Ukraine as well, because it weakens us as a nation. What do you think about that notion?
Well, I think it's a pretty simplistic and naive way to analyze things. If you don't like U.S. policy and what's going on in the world, it's easy to come up with a rationale that fits that. But I mean, if you look objectively at where Vladimir Putin expected to be today, he expected NATO to fall apart. He expected to reestablish a hard sphere of influence. He expected control over Eastern Europe in the way he had during the Cold War. He is very, very far from that. And to say that there are lots of things that are slowing the United States down: an open border that was letting in millions of people, an unsustainable national debt, and a feckless foreign policy. Donald Trump's fixed all those, including Ukraine. I look, when people say we're just throwing money at Ukraine with no plan, I completely agree with that. But you can't say Donald Trump doesn't have a plan, and you can't say that Donald Trump's plan for Ukraine doesn't put America first and American interests first.
Let me ask you, because one of the things that Donald Trump said was that during that meeting between Zelensky and Trump, that Zelensky had asked for more weaponry. What do you think about that? And should Donald Trump, who all this time has been saying that we shouldn't be involved in this war and so on and so forth, how do you think Trump will respond to that request?
Well, I think we're past the age when Ukraine is essentially a welfare state. We already have seen Ukraine defense industry go from $1 billion a year to $15 billion a year. We've seen people open up Russian access to Russian Russian money that was held in the West. We see the Europeans doing a lot more. I think the age of Ukraine as a gravy train is over. I think if there are more military support from the United States, it's going to be more in the form of recent loans and contractual things. So the notion that somehow Ukraine is going to drain the U.S. military arsenal, which, by the way, if there's another way to look at this, you could say thank you, Vladimir Putin. And you could say thank you to Xi as well. What we had been doing for decades, neglecting the capacity to defend our own country, was unthinkable, and it was thinkable because people did it. It was unforgivable, and many of us who were saying, we can't do this. We can't fight wars with no bullets to put in the gun, with no missiles to fire from the launchers. That we are strangling our capacity to defend ourselves. And even as defense budgets were going up, we were actually producing less and less, and this had to stop. And it took, I think, the shock of the war in Ukraine and the threat to Taiwan to get people to realize that peace through strength, it's like saying, I believe in peace through strength, but I never want to go to the gym. I never want to work out. I never want to do the work. And you can't do that. But you also can't just spend your way into security. So getting serious about fiscal responsibility, getting the fraud and waste out of the Pentagon, say if somebody's going to be in the ranks, they actually have to be fit and be able to serve.
Yeah.
Fixing all those, it's the whole package. And here's the difference. Biden was like, you go to the doctor and the doctor says, here, take a pill. Okay, that's easy. Now, the pill doesn't solve any of the problems. You don't get better, and the pill's actually quite expensive, and you're going more in debt. Donald Trump comes in and says, do the work. Get a nutritionist. Work out. Eat healthy. Be serious about taking care of yourself. And you know what? You will be better. And America's going through now is essentially a wake-up call on who we are, whether it's our physical well-being, our security, our economic well-being, or even our spiritual well-being. And Donald Trump has told one thing to the American people: put in the work, dude. You put in the work, and you will get the results. It sounds like a commercial for Gold's Gym or something.
But you make a lot of sense. James Carafano is joining us. Coming up, James, I got to check traffic real quick, but coming up, I want to talk about the main sticking point. There's a couple between Russia and Ukraine. And are these problems actually solvable? 6:46. Time to check the roads on WTN. Today, a high of 88, partly cloudy. Thunderstorms expected Tuesday through Thursday. Appreciate you listening to Nashville's Morning News. James Carafano joining us. James, okay, so you've got Putin, who clearly is not going to give up Crimea. You've got Zelensky, who says he will not sign on to anything that involves, officially giving away or acknowledging Crimea as, Russian-controlled land. I mean, that's just one of several sticking points. Is there any room to compromise here?
The compromise on the deal is there's lots of precedent for that. Matter of fact, we see this today actually in Georgia and Moldova. We saw it in parts of Europe after World War II, which is you acknowledge the occupation, but you also commit that you won't militarily try to recover your land. That's the standard deal. I imagine that's where we're wind up in the end. Look, people ask me about this all the time. I said, look, there's three scenarios here. Putin can say whatever he wants. He actually needs a deal. He's not in good shape at all. And so a strategic pause for him is actually greatly beneficial. So you could hear all this bluster from Putin, and then tomorrow you can pick up the phone and say, yeah, we have a deal. Because it's very Russian to say you want everything and you're not going to budge and then cut a deal. So that could happen. On the other hand, Putin could decide, you know what, I want to fight another year. He maybe sides with some of the critics that you mentioned. The West will fall apart. The United States will bankrupt itself. I'll take that bet. What do I have to lose? A couple more dead North Koreans and some more dead Russians? What's the problem there? So if he does that, the question is what does Donald Trump do, who's put himself into this peace deal? He could completely walk away, which I think we've already seen signs he's not going to do that, because that would make Trump look weak. And if we wound up with a disaster in another Afghanistan, that would cripple his administration for the rest of his term. The more likely scenario, quite honestly, is the United States will continue to support Ukraine. Does that mean we're going to get into the war? No. Does it mean we're going to start World War III? No. Does it mean that the American soldiers are going to be on the ground in Ukraine? No. Does it mean that that's a heavy lift for us? Probably not, because the Europeans are doing more. Ukraine's going to rebuild the country. They have frozen Russian assets. So it's a very, very doable lift for the United States. And in concert with all the other things that Trump is doing to Russia, including dropping the price of oil and other things, it's just going to make life worse for the Russians.
Well, so yeah. In the news today, James, is the conversation about whether or not Trump will place any sanctions on Russia and Vladimir Putin because of all of this, because clearly Trump is now, his ire has gone towards Vladimir Putin. And it was weak sanctions by Joe Biden that sort of emboldened Putin to go in. So how hard do these sanctions have to be?
Well, again, that's kind of up to Putin. Only Putin, I've said this many times, Putin has lost this war. I mean, his goal was to conquer Ukraine, humiliate the West, have NATO fall apart, have America leave Europe. None of that's happened. But only Putin can decide when to end the war, because he's the one attacking. And this is why I've never been terribly sympathetic to the Ukrainian argument. Well, I have to take back all my land. First of all, they don't have a military that can take back all their land, so that's meaningless. And the second is are you any safer if you take back every inch of Ukrainian territory? No, because Putin can attack you whenever he wants. So it's really whether peace is in hand or not is really in Putin's hand. And this goes back to actually Donald Trump's original statement, I can stop the war in 24 hours, which is true. He could have stopped the war in 24 hours. But the caveat that none of us ever talked about is if both sides wanted the war to stop. And it's very, very clear. I mean, again, think what you want about Ukrainians, think what you want about the war, think about everything else. Ukraine is willing to sign a deal for the fighting to stop. And whether the fighting stops or not, that's up to Vladimir Putin.
All right, James Carafano, always a great conversation, and we look forward to having you on again soon, and great perspective as always. It is 6:51 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. And Jay Harper is in for Joan Jones. And Jay, what's coming up at 7?
Yes, Dan, more on that deadly accident that happened off the Florida coast that left one person dead. Also, Canadian officials, they're trying to come up with a motive in that deadly car ramming up in Vancouver, Canada. We'll have those stories and more at 7 o'clock on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.